Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at a single technological breakthrough, the printed word, and how it literally acted like a powder keg that completely blew up the global status quo. We take it totally for granted today. We're constantly surrounded by books, signs, screens, but there was a time before print. And humanity's transition out of that era wasn't just some minor shift in how we read. It was a fundamental shift in how we functioned, how we rebelled, and really, how we evolved.
So, what is the most dangerous technology ever invented? Your mind probably jumps straight to modern weapons, right? Or maybe artificial intelligence, or the internet. But if we actually measure danger by a technology's ability to totally topple empires, fracture massive religious institutions, and spark absolute revolutions, well, we have to look much, much further back than the atomic bomb.
We're talking about print technology, the mechanical reproduction of text and images. And what's absolutely fascinating here is how the simple act of copying text threatened the highest power structures of human society. Because before print, knowledge was intensely hoarded. It was expensive, it was fragile, and it was entirely controlled by a very small elite. Print absolutely shattered that monopoly. It served as a global catalyst, handing the raw power of ideas straight to the everyday person. Section 1. The East Asian Origins. Before Gutenberg. Right off the bat, we've got to correct a massive historical misconception. Johann Gutenberg did not invent printing, not even close. The true origins of this world-altering tech actually lie far to the east. Just look at how this builds geographically over time. Way back in 594 AD, China was already heavily utilizing woodblock printing, making these incredibly beautiful accordion-style books. Then, by 768 AD, Buddhist missionaries brought that technique over to Japan, and it wasn't until the year 1295 that the famous explorer Marco Polo returned to Italy from China, bringing the knowledge of woodblock printing with him to Europe. Gutenberg's mechanical press? Yeah, that didn't even show up until the 1430s.
Section 2. The European Print Explosion, the Mechanical Leap. Now, when the technology finally did hit Europe, it caused an absolute earthquake. See, the existing European system was completely reliant on scribes who painstakingly hand-copied manuscripts onto highly expensive vellum, which, by the way, is animal skin. It was an incredibly slow, mind-numbing process, and it just completely fractured under the sudden, massive demand for cheaper books. Enter Johann Gutenberg in Strasbourg. He didn't invent the core concept, but he made a brilliant, vital mechanical leap. Basically, he looked at an everyday agricultural olive press, something used just for squeezing oil, and he adapted it. He created metal molds for individual letters, which gave us movable type, inked them up, and then used the press to squeeze a board called a platen right onto damp paper. It was a seriously ingenious mashup of existing technologies.
And the sheer scale of this revolution is mind-blowing. Before Gutenberg, a scribe could easily take months to copy just one single book. With the new press, European book production violently exploded. They went from making about 20 million copies in the second half of the 15th century to over 200 million copies in the 16th century. The world was literally flooded with pages. This created a really stark psychological contrast. For centuries, common people were what we call a hearing public. They gathered in taverns or village squares to collectively listen to oral tales and sacred texts. Knowledge was communal. You experienced it with others. But suddenly, cheap books created a reading public. Reading became this silent, individualized activity. It allowed a person to just sit alone with an idea, process it privately, and form their very own opinions, completely away from the influence of the crowd.
Section 3. Books, Dissent, and Revolution. And forming your own opinions? Well, that is a very dangerous thing for authorities. Suddenly, the printed word became the ultimate weapon for dissent, sparking cultural and political revolutions that would violently reshape the modern world.
Take the religious reformer Martin Luther in 1517. He famously called printing the ultimate gift of God and the greatest one. And you can see why. He utilized the unprecedented speed of the printing press to circulate his 95 theses, heavily criticizing the Catholic Church. His writings were reproduced in massive numbers almost overnight. He basically went viral, immediately kicking off the Protestant Reformation and permanently fracturing the Church. For Luther, print was literally a divine gift of liberation.
But compare Luther's joy with this reaction from the Latin scholar and Catholic reformer Erasmus. He was absolutely terrified. He complained that printers were filling the world with stupid, ignorant, slanderous, scandalous books. Honestly, it sounds remarkably similar to modern anxieties about the internet flooding us with terrible information, doesn't it? The authorities realized almost instantly that they had lost control of the narrative.
And the panic from those authorities was very real and very deadly. Take the story of Minocchio. He was just a regular working-class Italian miller in the 16th century. But because cheap print was a thing, he got his hands on some books, read the Bible, and started sharing his own unique interpretations of God. The Roman Catholic Church was so deeply threatened by this ordinary guy thinking for himself that the Inquisition executed him. They even instituted the Index of Prohibited Books in 1558 just to stop it from happening again. Fast forward to the 1700s, and we see print acting as the direct ideological powder keg for the French Revolution. It popularized the rational, questioning ideas of Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire and Rousseau. It created a totally new public culture, where people openly debated the legitimacy of the king and reason over tradition. They were even circulating underground cartoons mocking the lavish lifestyles of royalty while the commoners starved. Print just completely eroded the illusion of sacred, untouchable royal authority.
Section 4. India's Print Awakening, Manuscripts to Magazines. Now let's shift our focus globally over to the Indian subcontinent. Print actually arrived in India initially with European missionaries and served as a colonial tool for the British East India Company. But it quickly mutated into an unstoppable engine for Indian social reform and anti-colonial resistance.
Much like in pre-Gutenberg Europe, India had a massive, incredibly rich tradition of handwritten texts. But these pre-colonial manuscripts were written on palm leaves or handmade paper, so they were fragile, highly expensive, and strictly restricted to the upper elites. When print hit the scene, it obliterated that barrier. Suddenly you had cheap lithographs printed in local vernacular languages, making these texts portable and, crucially, accessible to the everyday person.
And the result was this amazingly diverse, pan-Indian explosion of local media. You've got an English rebel like James Augustus Hickey, starting the Bengal Gazette in 1780 to gossip about the colonial government. You have Hindu reformers like Ram Mohan Roy fiercely debating orthodox traditions. And then you have the Deoband Seminary printing thousands of fatwas to guide Muslim life. Print essentially became this massive, vibrant public square where absolutely everyone was fiercely debating their identities and their beliefs.
Section 5. Democratizing the page. Women and the working poor. If there is one huge takeaway here, it's how print radically democratized society. It didn't just help wealthy reformers. It handed a giant megaphone to the most marginalized people who had literally been silenced for centuries.
I mean, look at this incredible story. In conservative, early 19th century households, there was a widespread belief that educating women would literally bring ruin to the family. But Rajsundari Devi defied those strict rules. She secretly taught herself to read, hiding in the shadows of her kitchen. And by 1876, she published the very first full-length autobiography in the Bengali language. Just imagine the courage that took. Print gave her the power to articulate her lived experience to the entire world.
And she definitely wasn't alone. Cheap print meant you no longer needed to be rich or royal to have your grievances heard. You had writers protesting the miseries of upper-caste widows, or folks like Jyotiba Phule writing powerfully against the severe injustices of the caste system. Even overworked Kanpur cotton mill workers were publishing tracts linking caste and class exploitation. Print gave every single one of them a voice that simply couldn't be ignored.
Section 6. Threatening the empire. The inevitable backlash. Of course, when you empower the masses, the poor, and the colonized to think and speak freely, that is incredibly threatening to a ruling empire. So, just like the Inquisition in Europe, a vicious clampdown by the British colonial government was absolutely inevitable.
The mechanics of this censorship were brutal. As Indian newspapers got more and more assertively nationalist, the government totally panicked. They passed the Vernacular Press Act in 1878, giving themselves sweeping powers to literally seize printing machinery from local papers. They started tossing nationalist leaders into prison just for writing sympathetic articles. It became this relentless, brutal cycle. The press criticizes the state forcefully suppresses the press, and the people protest the suppression. This whole struggle ultimately reached a boiling point during the Indian independence movement. Mahatma Gandhi understood it perfectly. He knew that political independence, Swaraj, was entirely impossible without the freedom of speech, the freedom of association, and a free press. Because at the end of the day, you simply cannot liberate a nation if you aren't free to share the ideas of liberation on a printed page.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this. We've seen how the simple act of reproducing text completely rewrote human history, terrified kings, and sparked global revolutions. So ask yourself this final, absolutely crucial question. In an age of algorithms, AI, and endless social feeds, who truly controls the flow of information in your world today? Thanks so much for exploring this with me, and definitely keep questioning what you read.